Yo, Darius BRITT here, and today's all about mastering composition and framing. We've got cinematography with... As with everything else in life, nothing can truly be mastered, but with a lot of hard work, we can get pretty darn close. So without further ado, I do believe it about that time, let's get into it. Before we jump right into composition, first we gotta talk about beauty. Why do we find some people more attractive than others? While beauty may be in the eye of the beholder, it turns out math has a lot to do with it. Since ancient times, mathematicians have tried to measure beauty, and it turns out that a lot of what we call physical attraction depends on a ratio. A golden ratio. This ratio actually occurs very commonly in nature. Many things like plants, animals, the human body, shells, they all have this ratio in some form or another. Long story short, they analyzed beautiful faces looking at the ratio between the facial features, nose, mouth, forehead, eyes, eyebrows. Basically, when we find this ratio in mass quantities on somebody's face, it attracts us because it's familiar to us. Pattern recognition. When we talk about the aesthetic of beauty, we talk about symmetry, proportion, a recognizable pattern or method to the arrangement of the elements. We see the same thing in bodybuilding. The idea isn't just to get as big as humanly possible, it's to achieve symmetry and proportion as well. The most legendary bodybuilders had the widest backs and the smallest waists. So what does all this have to do with framing and composition? When we talk about composition, we're talking about the arrangement of the elements that make up that image. If a composition is aesthetically appealing or interesting on some level, it's because those elements have been arranged with some sort of detectable method. If we look at a shot where all the elements are thrown together at random without any sort of method, it's not a composition, it's chaos. Odds are it will not guide our eyes through the image in any sort of comprehensible way, nor will it be pleasing to look at. If we took those same elements and arranged them together with some sort of method, we end up with a composition that's aesthetic. There is an identifiable method to the placement of the elements. This method doesn't have to be complicated. It can be very simple, in fact. Sometimes simple is better. You can even arrange the elements in such a way as to draw attention to particular parts of the image by contrasting colors, contrasting sizes, but there needs to be some sort of method to the arrangement. Now, when we talk about the composition in film, we're talking about the visual aesthetics of any shot. The lighting, the colors, the shapes, everything you see. It's all about arranging the elements within the frame to guide the eye or draw attention to certain things. It's about intent. It's about method. Before we go any further, I gotta tell you guys how I met Big Willie style. So I was doing some last minute shopping in Toys R Us, and I ran into him. Cray cray. What was even crazier is his reaction was like, yo, D for Darius. I'm like impressed that he even knew who I was first off. And he's like, I love what you're doing with the show on the YouTube, with the films and the cameras. My reaction was, what? Yeah, I pretty much fanboyed. I mean, I just saw Suicide Squad like the day before 2 days ago. And I'll be honest, I wasn't really crazy about the movie, but I loved your part in it. Hashtag true story. Then I popped the question. I know you're probably super busy, but I would love to like have you on D for Darius sometime next week, or next month, or maybe next year, or never. Never's cool too. Long story short, he agreed. The champ is here! Rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is just one method of arranging the elements within a composition. If you divide the frame up with 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines, you end up with 9 boxes. The idea is if you align your subjects or your points of interest along the vertical lines or where the lines intersect, you will end up with a much more pleasing and balanced composition. When setting up a shot or a composition using the rule of thirds, the most important questions you should be asking yourself are, 1, what's my main point of interest? And 2, where am I putting it? For example, if I take this wide shot of this wrestler dead center, the shot feels flat and dull. But if I frame him up along one of the vertical thirds, we get a big improvement. Our eyes are still drawn to the wrestler, which is the main point of interest, despite the fact that he is not at the center of the frame. If I take this shot of Big Willie style and decide that the point of interest is his face, I might reframe to get the eyes along the intersecting lines on the top left third. In general, you want the eyes to fall on or near the top third line with close-ups or medium shots like so. Here's another shot. Let's move the eyes to one of the intersecting points. This is especially true with landscape shots. If you frame the horizon dead center of frame, it's a bit flat, but if we move it to the lower third, we end up with a stronger image. It even works if we move it to the top third. If you've got two subjects, you can frame them so that each falls onto one of the vertical thirds. If you have two subjects that are super close together, you can treat them as one subject. Group them together and place them at one of the intersecting points or along one of the vertical thirds. You can apply them to anything, even shadows. Take a scene from a movie you like and imagine overlaying these intersecting lines. You'll notice that the visual interests are easy to follow because most of the time the subjects fall on top of one of the vertical thirds and the background falls on top of the upper or lower third. Roughly. One thing to remember about the rule, you can be slightly off and still create a very powerful image. People like to cite the show Mr. Robot as a reason why the rule is completely useless. Well, they don't break the rule with every single shot. It's only certain shots. And second of all, let's take a look at the bigger picture here. You're talking about a show that has great casting, professional acting, lighting, sound, filmic locations, good story, and characters, all around polished, finished product. When they choose not to follow the rule of thirds, we buy that it's an artistic choice because everything else is so good. But for the newbie filmmaker who's still learning all the technical aspects of filmmaking, when he makes the artistic choice to ignore the rule, it usually kind of goes something like this. Your shots are kind of weird. It's supposed to be like that. I don't like the whole thirds thing is played out, everybody does it. Oh, so did you mean for the lighting and the acting and the sound to be bad too? But nobody uses rule of thirds on YouTube. They stand right smack in the middle of frame, just like you.
Spray. At the end of her dress. A little piece of wrongness.
To change your clothes.
When you're addressing your audience directly or teaching them something, you can kind of get away with any framing because, I mean, we're directly addressing you. I am looking right at you. People don't like rules, they don't like to follow them, but when I hear people say they don't even want to be bothered learning it, y'all gonna make me lose my mind. Take some time to learn the rule first, and you can always break it later. Center framing. Centralized framing is a great way to mix things up. It's when you place your main point of interest like right smack in the middle of the frame. Wait, back up. Oh my god. Didn't I just say not that long ago that you don't want to put the subject like right smack in the middle? There's a technique to it. Usually it only works if there's a ton of symmetry between both halves of the composition, making the image kind of picturesque. Wes Anderson's made an entire career using central framing as his signature style. Works really well for comedy as well. Stanley Kubrick made great use of central framing and single point perspective to create horror and suspense in his films. George Romero and John Seale made great use of central framing in Mad Max to keep the fast-paced action and editing coherent and easy to follow. Your eyes don't have to hunt around the frame for details. They made it really easy for you. Just look right here and you can follow all of it. Look space, aka looking room, aka leading room, aka nose room. Look space or looking room is the space between your actor's face and the edge of frame. You always want to give your actor or your subject room to look into frame. You should have about a third of the space behind the actor and 2/3 of the space in front of them. It's not a hard and fast rule though, it's more like a rule of thumb. If you're already using the rule of thirds to frame up your actors, then this should not be an issue for you because you're already going to have that lead room. If you don't leave enough looking space, this is called short sighting. As a result, things can feel off balance. Visual tension follows. If you leave too much looking space, things also look weird. Framing a shot where someone turns can be a bit tricky since we need to move with the subject while keeping them framed. We still adjust the frame to give the subject room to look. Let's see how it looks if you don't reframe for look space. Not so good. Lead room isn't just something that can happen to the left or right of frame, it can also happen vertically or diagonally across the frame. This also applies to moving subjects as well. That 2/3 extra space will prevent your subject from looking like they're about to run smack into the edge of frame because the audience can see the actor in fact has some place to go. It also happens to accommodate for small errors and panning. Without that cushion, you can see how awkward it is. Even in interviews, giving the subject that extra looking room helps the viewer feel at ease. Feel free to break this rule if you want. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm not your daddy. But it is good to at least understand the rule before you break it. Just saying. Now if you have some sort of narrative reason to reduce looking space for some dramatic effect, then by all means please do so. The King's Speech would be a prime example. They used short-sighted framing on the king to communicate a trapped feeling. When I'm composing shots, I'm feeling my way towards a composition that feels right. I'm not doing like a mental checklist of composition rules. When you're first learning, yeah, you do that sort of thing a lot, but after you get a lot of practice and experience, it just kind of becomes second nature. Headroom. So that space between the top of the frame and your actor's head, that's called headroom. If you watch any television show or film, you'll see a consistent sliver of space above the actor or the subject's head in any given shot. I even have it here. If you don't give enough headroom, you could cut into the actor's forehead. If you give too much headroom, that shot can look off balance or awkward. All that extra space up there just becomes dead space. If you add even more room, the shot becomes pretty abstract. Maybe you want that for some aesthetic reason, but in most cases it just doesn't work. Sometimes you might want to decrease or completely eliminate headroom for tight shots such as this one. You might be doing it for aesthetic reasons or narrative reasons. Feel free to do so, just be careful. In David Lynch's film Elephant Man, they used a crazy amount of headroom, but it's to accommodate the Elephant Man's abnormally large head in most cases. So they went ahead and made the extra headroom a part of the overall shot strategy of the film. They go against the guideline out of necessity, but the visuals still work. Leading line. Leading lines draw the eye into frame and lead them toward a subject or a point of interest. Anything could be a leading line. Streets, tree branches, fences. The lines on the steps really draw the eye right into D4 here. You've actually got to move yourself around and line the visual elements up in the composition. It does take a little bit of thought. Repetition. Looking for repetition is one of the methods for finding or creating strong compositions. Again, our brains are wired for pattern recognition. It's predictable, it's familiar, it's aesthetic. When something is repetitive, one element duplicates itself many times in a particular fashion. Looking for the repetition is one easy method for finding interesting and compelling compositions.
I'm a classic man. You can be mean when you look.
Golden ratio. We kind of already talked about this already, but the golden ratio or Fibonacci's number is a formula or a ratio that mathematicians equate to beauty. Pattern recognition. If we see that same ratio in an image or a composition, we recognize it as aesthetically pleasing. Golden ratio is mostly used in photography, but you could use it in filmmaking as well. The abridged version. There's this cool spiral. Put your point of interest in the little hole of the spiral, align the rest of the image with a rule of thirds type grid, and you're pretty much there. You may not know this, but the rule of thirds is just a simplified version of the golden ratio. They're really similar. It's much easier to tell somebody to split the frame into 3 equal parts, which is the rule of thirds, rather than to split the frame by the mathematical ratio of 1.618 blah blah blah, which is the golden ratio. Balance. Using balance in your compositions can help your audience feel a sense of ease in the shot. When we talk about balance, we talk about the amount of objects to one side of frame in comparison to the other. If your subject or your actor is positioned on one side of the frame, you can use a counterbalance to balance out the other side. Here's a shot without a counterbalance, and here is a shot with one. Now you don't have to balance every single frame out with a counterpoint, but it is an option if you want a different feel. Contrast. You can also use contrast to guide the eye towards certain parts of the frame. You can use the contrast between light and darkness. Will naturally look toward the lightest parts of the frame, which should be your subject or whatever the main point of interest is. Frame within a frame. Using natural framing can be a great way to guide the viewer's eyes towards certain parts of the frame. They're also a great way to create visual interest. Almost anything can serve as a natural frame that you can use to frame your actors. Doorways, windows, tree branches, you name it. Anticipatory framing. Anticipatory framing is when you anticipate the movement of the actor or the subject rather than react to it. It's good to practice this and feather out your stops and starts with your actors, especially if it's a scene with lots of improv. You don't get this luxury with documentary filmmaking or even videography, but it's still good to try and feather out your stops and starts. So I put together a little film just to exemplify some of the things that we've been talking about. I think I'll call it I just want to start off by saying I am a huge fan of your work. Like, I grew up on Fresh Prince. I don't think you understand. Like, that's the only reason why I got this hat. in West Philadelphia, born and raised in the playgrounds where I spent most of my days, chilling out, maxing and relaxing, all cool. I agree, we should just get right into it. What I'm really looking to do is I want to change the whole like filmmaking tip game. I feel like other YouTube channels, they're content with just like throwing examples and stuff out there, but I kind of want to do more than that, and I feel like me and you know, if we put our heads together, like, I feel like we can make history. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I agree. We should just like take it like one step at a time. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll just focus on writing it first. Good talk. Good talk. I don't think we're going to be able to pull this episode off well. I let you down. I let myself down. I let us down. And maybe I expected too much. I don't know what it is, but there is something that I'm missing, and I can't figure it out. But I know I'm missing something. I feel it. You're right, I can't afford to think like this. I mean, you kept going after Wild Wild West, right? So if you could do it, we could do it. And then it hit me. I'd been going about this all wrong. The answers were right there in front of my face the whole time. I just couldn't see it. How could I have not seen it? I think Will knew. He must have known. He said so much without saying anything at all. I think maybe he wanted me to discover it for myself. Oh yeah, it's gonna be a great episode. So let's talk about the shots. Framed on left third, framed on right third, left third again. Symmetry between left and right, and frame within a frame used here. Both Will and D4 are on vertical thirds. Symmetry between left and right, frame within a frame. Leading lines, subject framed on right third. Center framing. Both Will and D4 occupy vertical thirds. Short sighting to foreshadow trap feeling. Central framing with symmetry. Central framing with symmetry. Central framing with left and right symmetry. Left third. Repetitive pattern makes this shot interesting, and central framing. Left and right thirds. Rule breaking. I broke the rule here and here because the Will toy is so small that when I place him on the thirds, the frame seemed off balance. So I pushed him back a little bit further. Although I broke the rule here, the frame is still very balanced if you look at the negative space. Last thoughts. When it comes to things like, oh, I don't know, heart surgery, bridge building, skydiving, space travel, you know, where doing something incorrectly could probably get somebody killed. I'm pretty sure in those instances there are probably some rules you should never break. But when it comes to filmmaking, blindly following rules can stifle creativity. Knowing when to follow a rule is just as important as knowing when not to follow. Oh, and I really enjoyed working with Will too. Great guy. I really wish we had some time to like catch a beer and have a chat, but I mean, he's really busy and he had to catch a flight. Well, I do believe that's all that I got for you. If you're interested in getting a second opinion or feedback on your short films or short scripts or feature scripts, I do consulting as well. I will leave a link in the description section where you can get more info on that. I will also leave a couple of links in the description section where you can see some samples of what this feedback would look like to give you kind of a better idea of what the service is. If you enjoyed what you saw, please like, go subscribe. You can also find me on the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, or the Twitter, baby. You can also check out my second YouTube channel, DARIOUS, where I vlog about my adventures on the film festival circuit with my first feature-length film, sound live casting, vlogs, etc., etc. I do believe that's all I got for you suckers. D-BRITT out. Booyah!